Everybody. It's certainly a privilege for me to be here. I hope I can give you a little bit of a scope of the fruit industry. You've got some very apt people here going to talk about some of the other horticultural industries, but I hope to give you some sort of a helicopter view of the fruit sector specifically, and on a very high level I'll include the wine industry in some of my slides as well. I would like to start with just a brief background on Hortgro, who we are, what we do, and then, as I said, some high-level perspectives. I'm sure you'll get a copy of the slides and the stats. I'm not going to go into all the detail, and then just conclude on some challenges that's either with us or will be with us in the not too distant future. But before I start, I would just like to, in the absence, thank our agriculture economist, Nina Viljoen. She assisted me with the preparation and the collation of some of these information, and then also my colleagues in the Fruit South African context, within table grapes, within citrus and subcrops, and also from Winpro, the high-level figures that I got there. Some of you in the industry would have seen this slide. The last 2-3 years, I tend to start my presentations with this slide, and all that I'm trying to illustrate is that the environment within which we as commodity bodies and commercial role players within our industry have to operate in a very, very complex environment. And it's a ever-changing environment, and even the pace of that change is increasing. My main job really is to make sure that we concentrate and keep our eye on the ball on those things that we can make a difference on, because it's impossible to be everything for everybody. We cannot get involved in commercial activities, although we have quite a number of what we call user pay commercial industry services, but it's not there to in a profit sort of driven exercise. So you can probably identify with a number of those buzzwords, terms that's used there. But as I said, just very briefly on Hortgro, our primary stakeholders, actually the owners of Hortgro, is our palm and stone fruit industries. And about this time last year, we changed the names from the traditional apple and pear growers association to Hortgro Palm, and the South African Stone Fruit Producers Association to Hortgro Stone. And what it basically boils down to is all those activities, all those industry services functions that's exclusive to those two broad sectors are housed within Hortgro. And then we have a number of other industry service structures. SAPO, I understand Sean made a presentation yesterday, but Hortgro's got a 50% stake in SAPO, for instance, as our industry plant improvement organization. And you can see quite a number of other service entities. The other one that will resonate with you is called DEFCO, also an industry-owned company, and there the palm and stone industry's got a 59% stake. But all those activities then, where there's other stakeholders, other fruit types, are housed in these substructures in legal entities directly, whilst Hortgro deals with joint palm and stone fruit issues. We also provide a number of services to a range of what we call commodity alternative crops. LZ that will talk after me on the on the ornamental crops. The fynbos industry specifically is one of those sectors. But you can see olives, figs, pomegranates, pecan nuts, and we've got a number of trusts that we administer. And I think the last time I counted, we have a set of books of 34 different entities that we provide services for. Our vision is to create an enabling environment, to link that to growth of our industry, and our vision is that we should double the footprint of our industry by 2050. So that's our vision. I think it's achievable, maybe not by 2050, but maybe in that era when I and many of you will not be around, but we have to create the platform and the base for the next generation to do their thing. Our main functions, basically, those that have to do with the production side of things, where cultivars, plant improvement, everything that's got to do with the factory. On the supply side, that's one of our major focus areas. And we see more and more as we progress. And when I come back to the challenges, I'll also highlight that. But unfortunately, we see less and less delivery from key government departments. And what we have to do as commodity organizations is to pick up some of those services and functions. And that has a great linkage onto the demand side, the market side. And you can see a number of those things there. And then there's cross-cutting stuff, communication, representation, dealing with funding, finances, and things like that. And obviously in the South African context, the whole issue of transformation, economic empowerment, land reform, those type of issues where we facilitate things. So that just very briefly on what Hortgro is and what it do broadly. But the fruit and the wine industry, there's about 850,000 jobs in the agri sector, and the fruit and the wine industry have more than 500,000 of those jobs. We've got just over 8,000 farmers or production units. We've got a turnover of just on 80 billion rand. And if you add the agri-tourism, wine tourism onto that, it's close to 90 billion rand sector. So quite important in the South African context with regard to job creation, with regard to rural development, rural stability, and obviously forex, foreign exchange earnings. And these sectors are responsible for about 60% of our agri exports. You can see where the main production areas are. Western Cape, the main one, just over 50% of fruit and wine. But in the northeast of the country, also very much driven by the subtropical and the citrus industry, also very substantial plantings there. And if you tally all of that up, it's just under 200,000 hectares of fruit and wine. The split, and as I go through my slides, the take-home message is there's no one-size-fits-all. Each one of these cultivar groups or commodity groups have got their own challenges, they've got their own culture, they've got their own nature, they've got their own personalities that need to be managed and facilitated. But as I said, exports remain our biggest single thrust, and there are things like market access, and not just new markets, but also the maintenance of current markets is a very high priority. But just under 6 million tons being produced by the fruit and wine industry. We export all over the world, and you can see that we're still very focused on what we call the traditional markets in the UK and Western Europe. But we are seeing changes, fairly drastic changes with some of the fruit types, and I'll conclude with a few slides as far as that is concerned. But of that, nearly 6 million tons, we export just over half of that in a fresh form or in a bottle from a wine perspective. Then just very briefly on some of the major fruit types, and as I said, these slides and statistics I got from my colleagues in some of these other industries, but the avocado industry, you can see around 17,500 hectares. That is one of the major growing industries currently in the country, and I think they are growing at around 1,500 hectares per year as growth goes, but mainly focused in the Limpopo, Mpumalanga, northeastern provinces of South Africa. Exports, you can see EU 75%, UK 20%, so very focused on the traditional markets, but there is some growth in new markets, and they are also very much focused on new market access, especially to the Middle East, the Far East. There's the growth that I talked about. You can see it was fairly stable over a period of time, but then the last year or two, things are really starting to pick up, and we expect that to be virtually exponential in the next few years. Other major subtropical commodity is lychees. Also that part of the world, eastern part of the country. Smaller industry, more niche type industry, but also growing. And again, you can see a very huge exposure to Europe. Netherlands indicating 88% there, but we know that that's a sort of a channel conduit into Western Europe, even Eastern Europe. But it shows you that that's the part of the world that they market on. Very up and down type situation as far as lychee exports go. The other major one is mangoes. Just around 7,000 hectares. And you can see here there's a huge difference between the avo lychee industry with limited exports, much more on the juice achar type market, which is a very big market in South Africa itself. So again, back to my comment on no one size fits all. There's different needs, and we have to be sensitive for that. There you can see the exports and much more to the Middle East. I think some of that probably also for achar type market. Then from my colleagues in the citrus industry, a couple of slides. You can see some growth here in the Western Cape. We've seeing a lot of new plantings in the Western Cape specifically, especially the easy peelers, clementine type varieties. But even in the Northern Cape, around the Orange River Basin, there's plantings taking place there. So a move away from the traditional areas into some of the non-traditional areas. And you can see the bulk of it is still Valencias and Navels. As far as exports goes, also a huge percentage into Europe. And we know all the challenges the citrus industry have on CBS and things like that. So we are seeing a move to some of these other markets, especially in the East, in the Middle East. Our table grape guys, also you can see basically Western Cape based, but also a fair chunk in the Orange River Basin, and we see some growth in the northern provinces, Limpopo, even Gauteng. We see some growth there, but again, the market's mainly to the north of us, Europe, UK. 90% of the table grape industry volumes is exported, so the domestic market is virtually non-existent for them. We've also seen a huge move towards seedless. Virtually 90% is seedless, and you can see there the split: red 50%, white 40%, and black 10%. And my information is that's the sort of direction that it will be remaining. Then just to conclude on my sector, I know hopefully a little bit more about than these others, but just apples and pears, again you can see a huge difference. We've got a very strong domestic market for our apple industry, virtually a Southern African market. And currently Africa, other than South Africa, is the single biggest apple market, and that grew from virtually nothing to around 20% of apple exports in 8 years. I think 7-8 years. Pear industry, a huge percentage still going to the processing side, canning side specifically. And they've got some challenges at this stage, so that channel of our industry is shrinking rapidly. But the palm fruit industry, just around 9 billion rand turnover per annum. Much less dependent on the traditional markets. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, just around deregulation of our industry, we were virtually dependent on Western Europe and the UK, but as I said, there's been a fairly big move into Africa, Middle East, and also the Far East, and there's some key markets there that we are on the verge of accessing, and I'm personally very excited about that because I believe that will be the driver to transform our industry and to ensure that we have proper economic empowerment in the process as well. The stone fruit industry, very different between the crop types. You'll see cherries included there. The major cherry production area now is the Western Cape, and that is still a very good growing industry. But plums, fresh prunes, very much for the fresh market, whilst your apricots, peaches are very much still in the drying and the processing, canning type market. And a total different profile than palm fruit, very much focused on Europe. And if I look at a commodity like plums, I think about 90% of that volume still go into the UK and the western part of Europe. So, Madam Chair, just to conclude with some challenges and how the future look like. Climate adapted cultivars, I've put it right at the top there, with good yields, packouts. That's what we are striving for as an industry. I foresee that we will see a change in the matrix of commodities in our different production areas. I've mentioned citrus already, plums replacing vineyards, mostly in the Little Karoo, cherries in the Western Cape, but also berries, which incidentally is also LZ's baby within the Hortgro structure. We see some huge growth there. Water efficiency is linked to that climate change. That is increasing, doubling our establishment cost of hectares, but it's required to assist with better yields, better packouts, also water efficiencies and things like that. And my personal view is that we will probably move away from these very late cultivars that requires irrigation for very long periods, and we will probably see over time a move towards earlier varieties, but obviously those that are making money at the end of the season, especially things like Pink Lady, Sundowner, and so on, that will remain, but it will have to be profitable to make sure that people continue to plant those varieties with the water needs over a longer period. I've mentioned the market access issues, trade compliance. It's a whole plethora of requirements, ethical trade, environmental, food safety, pressures on MRLs, all those sort of things. But we also see protectionism back as in the cloak of biosecurity, things like that. But unfortunately, we have to struggle with unscientific type of things that is adding problems. Transformation, I've mentioned, the black economic empowerment, the land reform issue, that's a South African issue. I'm confident that we are getting to grips with that. I believe it's an opportunity rather than a threat, and we are, especially in the fruit industries, we are seeing some very good successes, especially in a equity partnership type of arrangements. Policy uncertainties, government capacity, I've alluded to that. The expropriation without compensation of land, hopefully after the elections some more sanity will prevail. But we've certainly got some policy challenges with regard to land, to labor, and to water that we need to deal with. Human resources training, I believe that we are moving towards technologists. In the future, we'll see more and more tools to increase productivity, to deal with these higher yields, automation. I hesitate to use the word mechanization because it's got a negative connotation with regard to jobs. So the nature of jobs and the skills required for those jobs, I believe, is changing, and we as a sector need to adapt to that. And then the last point, infrastructure with regard to roads, rail, ports, dams, things like that. And obviously the maintenance thereof. We currently experience quite a problem with load shedding and things like that, which you've just missed. You've dodged that bullet. But it's been a fairly big problem 2 weeks ago. Hopefully that will clear up as we go forward. But other maintenance type of issues and water, recycling, desalination, all those sort of things is something that needs to be addressed. So, Madam Chair, that's my short overview, and I'm sure there might be some questions later, which I'll gladly deal with.